Well, it's certainly June, but you know what's interesting. I suspect what would be most interesting for anybody who views these videos would be the fact that even though both videos might have been taken almost at the same time, the gardens will not be the same because each year something different will usually come out. And some plants will be particularly happy one year, and then the next year they may kind of wait, and then it kind of depends on how the weather's been. And because we had all those nice rains, certain plants have really, you know, shown up. For example, that yellow thing is a basket of gold cousin. The classic basket of gold blooms in April and May. This is a late one, and I got that from Michael Bronner of Harlequin's Garden in Boulder, and he just loves that thing. And I can see why now, because it blooms for a long time, but that's never done that. And then that beautiful lady's eardrop, they call it, the anosma behind it. I've grown that for years, but this is the year it really has shown its mettle. And so you can see this is the time of year. I would say it's usually the first week of June, which is where we're at. It probably has the biggest variety of things in all the different parts of the garden. So I haven't sat down and counted them, but there's many hundreds of plants in bloom. And last week there were a different assortment, and next week there'll be a bunch of new ones. So this time of year is the time of year that all winter long, you know, we think, oh, it could only be June, you know. And then June comes, this time of year comes, and there's so much happening. It's like, oh, you know, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta finish this, I gotta. That funny little plant is a new one. It's a Helichrysum from the islands of Greece. Amorgos in particular is an island north of Crete, and that's what it's named for, Amorginum, but it grows in a handful of other islands. And I'm just astonished at how hardy it's been. So that it came through last winter where we had damage on some items. And of course this is a Daphne here. This is Daphne Oleodys, which is the commonest Daphne in Greece and in Turkey, and I've seen that both in Greece and in Turkey. It's almost every mountain you go to, there'll be masses of it, and I only have one little specimen right now, but that's enough. You know, it connects me back to, you know, the Eastern Mediterranean and my ancestral roots. So there's all these little gems, which is what makes this garden this time of year so fun. That big powder puffy white thing there looks like an astilbe almost. Astilbes need a lot of water, and I don't water enough to grow them and certain plants like that. But that's actually a beet, and it comes from, it grows over a fairly wide range of Asia. And if you can see, the leaves have something loves the leaves, probably because it's sweet like beets are. And it's looking particularly nice now, but I like it because it's such a vigorous, happy thing, and can take my conditions that are not always as lush as some plants would like it. It looks fairly lush now, but that's because we were lucky to have 2 really good rains last week, and the week before that, of course, it wasn't a rain, it was a snow in late May, which was kind of disconcerting. But these plants all bounced back pretty nicely. But you saw trees all over the Denver Boulder area. They didn't do so well. This is another one of my favorite plants. This is a Meadow Roux. And Meadow Roux rarely have petals like this one, or petaloid segments. And this is a special one from the Mediterranean that usually they're just powder puffs of stamens. Like I have some elsewhere that have them. And they're quite attractive, but with the petals, this is much nicer. So there's a lot of fun things happening this time of year. You know, every a few feet there's something that'll pop up. There's a purple salvia that's tucked by the rock there, and that comes from Morocco, and that was introduced to horticulture by my colleague Mike Kinchin, and it's certainly one of the most spectacular rock garden plants in the garden right now. And it has that extra layer of meaning for me that, you know, it came from a friend and from his work. another Greek plant. That is a Scutularia, a skullcap. The flowers reminded somebody of a skullcap. I don't know. They look more like something else to me, like a face. But it's a very widespread all over. Again, I've seen that all over Greece and Turkey, and goes all the way to Central Asia. That particular one is Scutularia orientalis and variety pinnatifida, and it's very happy there. Almost a little too happy. There were a few other plants that grew around it that are no longer with us because it. Then we have what I call our triumphs. Triumphs are when you do something that you really don't intend to do that turns out to be pretty fantastic. See that little monkey flower by the water there? That's actually grown as an annual and sold locally, and I don't know who on earth would possibly grow it because it needs water, but I had the right spot for it, and it's actually from South America, and it grows along streams in Argentina and Chile, and I've seen it there, and it usually comes in bright orange or red, and these are hybrids that have been produced, and I love the colors are so spectacular, and the flowers are about twice as large as they are in nature. And I put that in last year thinking this will be nice for a year, but it came back, and I was like, never expected that, because I don't know why. South American plants are usually a little tender, and but not that one. That seems to be very happy. So that was one of my triumphs. We always have these things that we yearn to do and see, and things you don't expect. My pots, because we had snow just 2 weeks ago, and it was still kind of chilly, and I was kind of late. We only just planted all the pots, so they look kind of skimpy right now. But in another month or two, and as I told you, we're going to have a big party in the middle of July, or towards the end of July. So everything is kind of geared for, to have a kind of crescendo then. There's a campanula that's never performed quite like that before on the wall. That comes from the Adriatic Sea. It grows on both sides, and it's a particularly nice specimen this year. Campanula portenschlagiana. Some of these plants have Latin names that really you kind of wish that somebody else had named them. The pond has been a little more fun this year because I have fish. I had fish in them for years and years and years, and eventually we didn't, and now we have fish again, and they make a difference. They've been in there for about a month, and they're a little skittish. Every morning I come out and I feed them, and they haven't figured out that I'm their friend yet. So I keep waiting for them to figure out that there's food and that I'm giving them the food, so that they'll come and check that out. Anyway, the big news for me is that I have 2 new gardens. If you remember last year when you came, this was a sea of Mormon tea from Asia, ephedra. I had an extremely spectacular stand of it that was way too big and was taking over the world. And I was worried because I thought, how much further is it going to go? It was creeping and spreading, and it was absolutely gorgeous. There were people who would say to me, "Oh my God, that's my favorite feature in your whole garden is this massive stand of ephedra." And well, there are minimalists who like to have massive stands of just one thing. I'm not one of them. I want a massive stand of 1,000 things. And so now there's going to be hundreds of plants growing where there was just one. I couldn't have done it because I'm getting to be an older fellow. But fortunately, I have a friend who is transitioning careers and kind of used our house as a home base. He would house sit for us, and he did some pretty big jobs for us. His name is Ryan Keating. And Jan had been telling me she wanted a shortcut to the front yard. And of course, there was no way of going through that sea of ephedra. So Ryan started last year, and it took him almost a year to get rid of the ephedra. We filled just countless bags with it, which I gave to my Chinese doctor, because it's actually the source of ephedrine. So I don't know if he processed it or not, but then we had to dig out the massive roots and then, kill it and spray it and make sure it was dead. And then now, eventually, when we've kind of got ahead of the ephedra, we've decided it was time. And so he brought in a tremendous amount of special soil mix using expanded shale and some sifted topsoil and whatnot. And so he regraded the whole thing, brought in this new soil mix, and then 7 tons of rock. And then now I've been mulching it with the same kind of rock. So it's very raw right now because it's brand new. I just put the plants in the last 2 weeks. So as you can see, there are dozens of plants in there. And so far, every one of them has survived. This is called a crevice garden, and crevice gardening has become, it's a form of rock gardening that's very fashionable right now because we have some extraordinary young talents around the United States building these. And they're done to have small crevices because a lot of these plants want to have that deep root run. And so this is not a typical crevice garden because they often tend to be very schematic and like just rock next to rock next to rock. But instead, this one is a little more naturalistic with more rounded rocks, and they're granite instead of sandstone. And I actually prefer this because it's not quite so, how should I put it, regular. It's got a little bit of irregularity to me, and that pleases me. But of the hundreds and hundreds of plants that I put in, only 2 seem to have not made it. You actually have to remove all the soil when you plant the plants. And I was lucky because I had a cool spell. So I might have lost some otherwise, but as it was, I've lost almost nothing. So if you look in here carefully, you'll see there's a lot of happy plants. And of course, in another year, they're going to be much bigger and more impressive. Right now, I only have a couple that are doing their thing. There's a red flower on top of the rock there. That is a red delphinium from California. It grows pretty widespread in Northern California, the Coast Ranges, and also in the Sierra Nevada, but usually not real high elevation. So I don't know how hardy it'll be, but I was in California about a month and a half ago with some dear friends from the Tilden, the Botanic Garden in the Tilden Park area of Berkeley. And they took me on a wonderful field trip in the Coast Range. And we went into this incredible valley that had just thousands of those growing on the banks, much taller than this. There was a different form, but very spectacular. And I kept thinking at the time, boy, I'd sure love to grow that. I wonder if I'll ever be able to grow it. But seeing how it grew, I realized that this habitat that we were creating might be good for it. And so at our Botanic Gardens plant sale, my colleagues grew it, unbeknownst to me, and I go in there as this big flatful. So I grabbed a bunch of them and bought them at the sale. And that was just about a month and a half ago. So I was pleased. As soon as the garden was done, that was one of the first plants that went in. And so I'll be very anxious this coming year to see how it overwinters. But my sense is that this is probably going to be the right habitat for it. So I hope it'll be a good perennial. In which case I will have had another triumph. So the triumph for me is when you find a plant that you love and are interested in, and you find the right place for it. And that's really fun. And especially when it turns out to be really happy and do well.
Is this little one next to it is that the...
That's the Cretan Dittany. Yeah. Yeah, I actually lost my big plants that were on the cliff over by the rock garden. And last winter was pretty tough. I lost a number of things. So I'm starting over again. And hopefully this will be a better habitat. I'm actually going to plant some more of it because that's a very important plant for me. A lot of these plants, Tony Avent, who's one of the great nurserymen of America in Oregon, in North Carolina, he has a saying that you have to try a plant at least 3 times before you really decide that it's not hardy or appropriate. Well, I think it's funny because there's plants I've tried 100 times, because you keep trying and trying, and then someday you find out, it just needed a little bit more shade or a little bit more this. I cannot say how many times I've given up on a plant, and then I'll visit a friend here in Denver and they're growing it beautifully, and I realize I gave it all the wrong conditions, because unless you've gone and seen the plant in its habitat, you don't really know. And plants are very finicky. Some plants, they just have to have just this much sun or this much shade or this kind of soil or that kind of soil, and it's not like you can go and look it up on Wikipedia or in the encyclopedia or something. A lot of that information just is not recorded anywhere. So, and of course every climate's different. So.
And tell me about this plant from.
Oh, that succulent that you're zeroing in on is called Eloinopsis Spatulata. It doesn't really have a common name, but in nature it's restricted to a very small area near the town of Sutherland, which is one of the coldest places in the South African Karoo. And so the plant is pretty important for me, because I've seen it in nature in bloom. It blooms in October in the wild there. Here it blooms in March and April, and it has gorgeous pink flowers, but it just has a fascinating leaf form. And it turned out to be the parent of a bunch of hybrid ice plants that were first developed by my friend Bill Adams in Pueblo. And now there's a fellow in Utah who's hybridizing them, and some other people, and a young man down in Pueblo again. And they're producing dozens of these incredible hybrid ice plants that bloom in the early spring. And I have quite a few of them already, and this garden should be ideal for them, because they need just this kind of exposure. It's protected from the really harsh winds or cold being near the house, so I think that they'll do well here. Because in Denver, they're a little marginal. In Salt Lake City, they grow like weeds for my friend there. And I'm hoping they'll be like weeds for me here too. But they're incredibly beautiful. When they bloom, they have every color under the rainbow. This one is a hot pink, but they have some that are scarlet, orange, yellow, multicolored, and they're really glorious. So that was one of my little dreams, was to have a garden where I could grow these, and guess what? I do. So yeah, even though my garden is a half acre and it had many habitats, this is a habitat that was missing. So, and this is my other new fun bed. If you remember, a year ago, there was really not much under here, and a lot of people don't have much success growing plants under spruce trees. But the reason, of course, is that usually nobody has done much soil preparation under the spruce trees. And in this case, it turned out that underneath my spruce tree, when we were building the garden path here, we had stockpiled all the gravel under here. I don't know why we did that. That was like 30 years ago when we were designing this garden. And I kept wondering, why aren't plants growing in here? And so I decided, as Ryan was busy working over there, that I'd see if I could renovate this area, because I love woodland plants, and I don't really have quite enough places for these choice woodlanders. So I came in here and I started digging, and I found it was this thick layer of gravel. It was like 6 or 7 inches of gravel all the way under here. So I dug out all the gravel, which you'll still see the buckets where I have a lot of it that it's stockpiled. I top dressed all my pathways because they needed some more. And then I sifted out what I could of the soil that was there and mixed it with sphagnum peat and with a topsoil that I had gotten from dumping pots. And so I now have almost a foot of wonderful, deep, woodland soil that these wildflowers love. And then I had stockpiled all these wildflowers that I'd been able to get this spring. I had them in my nursery, and they were just itching to be planted. But I wanted to get it right, so I kept working on the soil. And when I finally got it right, it was all bermed and I contoured it. I had a planting orgy. I must have planted, you can see hundreds of plants in here. And I did it all in a day. I was so tired, exhausted by the end of the day. But of course, planting in that fluffy soil was no big deal. But I'm very gratified because I would say of the plants that are in here, almost none of them do I have anywhere else in the garden. So they're all brand new to me and they'll be new to the garden. A lot of irises that come from the Pacific coast, they call Pacificas, all in through there. They come from California. That's Iris de Glaziana that's found all over California and southern Oregon. And I grew them in Boulder as a kid really well. But they do need this kind of really good soil, this wonderful woodsy soil, and kind of the edge of the woods. So I think that's a good habitat for them. And I actually have 7 species of those. And then, of course, all these little ground covers in here. Now they're just all sort of one here, one there. But in a year, those are Vancouverias. They spread by runners, and so that should make a wonderful ground cover. And I'm pretty pleased. Everything's living up to expectations. When I put the ferns in, I thought they'd be happy, and sure enough, they're putting up new fronds like crazy. And I couldn't resist. I had to put in a hydrangea. This is like the wrong plant to grow in Colorado because it likes, acid soil, it likes shade, it likes humidity, and it likes water. Well, in this spot, it won't be hard to provide that, so I could actually grow that. But most people plant those things, and they just look miserable. But you can see it's looking pretty happy. So it's a slight contrast to the cacti over there. As you can see, this pretty much exemplifies the fact that sun makes a huge difference. Here, these plants are all in full sun, and they're growing on a totally different substrate. And here you are. Over here, it's basically Arizona, and over there, it's basically the Pacific Northwest. So you can see, it's just a few feet apart, but there's shade and then there's sun. And in Colorado, the south side of your house is Arizona and the north side is Alaska. And people don't really realize how important that is, that contrast of sun and shade. Yeah, it's early morning, so the cactus flowers, they don't open till usually about 10 or 11 o'clock when the sun comes. Yeah, the next 2 weeks is when all my apunchas bloom. These are the big padded cacti that terrify people because they have not only do they have spines, they have glaucas, which are even worse than the spines. But I love them and grow more than my share. And the yuccas are all starting to put up their spires. It's an exciting time of year. Yeah, every morning I wake up at dawn, which is earlier and earlier, of course, for the next few weeks. And I immediately put on my warm long johns and have to come out and check out and see what's happening. Yeah, early morning is really a magical time. And then, of course, late in the afternoon when the sun starts to decline. Those are the 2 times when almost any garden looks good. Ironically, a lot of the plants don't open their flowers till the middle of the day. But this is a blue star, they call it. It's an Amsonia. And this is one that's relatively not terribly common in nature. It's Amsonia illustris. It comes from the Ozarks and from Missouri mostly. And it loves my garden. That's one plant. And I didn't plant it, it's a seedling. And it came from around the corner where I have a big planting of it. And I left it for a couple of years, and now, of course, it looks nicer than where the other ones are. You know, it's funny how plants will find the place they like to grow. And this is definitely, it's where it wants to be. So now I'm probably going to thin the ones I have up there, because this one's so much more spectacular. You can see its parents are up here. Oh, look at the gas plant with the rose behind it. Yeah, that's, I need to prune out that dead branch of the rose, but that's a nice vignette. See, this is my original planting of the Amsonia, and it's okay, but it's not as spectacular as its little seedling down below. That will stay. These may not be quite so thick in the future. I have too many other plants I want to play with. This time of year it's the gas plant, and there's the Helichrysum. You saw the white flowered one that had petaloids segments. This doesn't have petals, it just has those big anthers that stick out. This is one that comes from, I believe this may actually be a Himalayan one. There's a European one that looks a little like this as well. I grow quite a few Helichrysums. It's a genus I'm quite fond of. Although I've yet to get there's one in Colorado that's a dryland one that would grow in my Crevice Garden that was discovered by a friend of mine. Yeah, there's more of the gas plant. There's a lot of gas plant in this garden because it self-sows all over the place. It grows in exposed areas where it's unwatered. It grows here in this bed where it gets water. And it grows everywhere. One of the great plants. Yeah, we always seem to come back to the pond. The pond is really, water features are the bane of gardeners because they require so much attention and maintenance and you know, issues and they're worth it in the long run. Yeah, lots of these little bog plants. That orange is a globe flower. It's a hybrid globe flower that blooms longer. Mostly they bloom in the spring. And the blue here is a Siberian iris, but it's the wild form. The cultivated form's usually about twice as big. But I'm one of these people who kind of prefers the wild things to the ones that are overblown. I grow some of the hybrid iris that are big and puffy, and you can't help but like them. A friend of mine calls them hankies on a stick, but I like them. And so I grow a few of those. But most of what I grow, I'd say probably 90% of the plants I grow are wild species. They're actually what grows in nature, and they look pretty much like what would grow. You know, a good example is this is the Colorado Columbine, which has been here for several years, which delights me because it's really not that good of a garden plant. Most people plant it and then it'll die after a year or two. But this one's come back for several years, so I'm hoping that this will be a spot where I eventually can get some seedlings to regenerate themselves. That quest that we have, where we want to find that spot where plants will be happy forever. In a garden like this, we call them, you know, the plantsman type garden. It goes back really to the late Middle Ages when people started growing things for more than just their medicinal or edible properties. The first people started growing plants for their flowers. We just got curious about them, grew all different kinds of things, and not necessarily pretty things, just interesting plants. And that's kind of the tradition that I belong to. And some of my favorite plants are kind of homely, you know, and nobody would notice or care except me, you know, and a lot of little ferns and little things like that. So, you know, for gardens, for most gardeners, I say the longer you garden, the more a garden really becomes a companion, and it develops all sorts of little characteristics that you learn to appreciate. And most visitors come in and they look for the color and they look for this and that, but you look for all sorts of little things that other people would never notice.